Genesis tonight, Lord willing. To finish out Genesis, you're talking about the reunion between Jacob and Joseph and the finality of both of their lives. So we want to close out Jacob's life and then a little bit later close out Joseph's life. And to do that, we're not going to look at every little detail in the last several chapters of Genesis, but we are going to start in chapter 45 and verse 24. When Joseph lets Pharaoh know that his brothers are in town, and I'm sure the rumor started right about the time that the Egyptians heard him wailing and bawling his eyes out in the next room. They figured out something was up, that these guys were a little bit special. So he lets his brothers know that he is alive, and then he lets Pharaoh know that these are his brothers. Pharaoh is all in. He wants Jacob and all the family to move to Egypt. He wants them to have everything that they need. Joseph has gained such a place of honor in Pharaoh's court that pretty much whatever Joseph wants is what Joseph is going to get. And we've already talked about it, so we'll skip it tonight, but there's that section of Scripture where it talks about how people came and gave Pharaoh money for the provisions, and they ran out of money, so they came and gave him their livestock, and they ran out of livestock, so they gave Pharaoh themselves. And so the whole of Egypt ends up being indentured servants of Pharaoh. He owes Joseph a great deal, and he's good for it. He takes good care of Joseph and wants Joseph to take good care of his family. So here is Joseph sending his brothers back to get his dad and the rest of their family. This is beginning in 45:24. He sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said, "Don't quarrel on the way." I love that. All of a sudden, Joseph is playing the part of the daddy. You guys behave while you're on your trip. So they went out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's the ruler of all of Egypt." Jacob was stunned, and he did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts that Joseph had sent to carry him back, which, by the way, was Pharaoh's idea, make sure you send plenty of carts to get their stuff, the spirit of their father Jacob revived, and Israel said, "I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." It could have easily happened that Jacob died long before he got to see his son again. He was depressed. He was having problems financially. He was having problems agriculturally. There were lots of reasons that Jacob could have already been gone. But God wanted Jacob to see the end of this thing. He wanted to be able to enjoy after all of this mourning that he'd been through. So Israel set out with all that was his. When he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Do you remember Beersheba? God visited with him at Beersheba. God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." You have to get the vision that they had, that God was in a particular place, right? When Jacob gets to Beersheba, he remembers that it was in Beersheba that he had a dream, had a vision, had an encounter with God. And so he wants to have another one. So he stops in Beersheba. Sure enough, God visits with him. And God says, "I want you to go to Egypt, and I'm going to tag along. I'm going to go to Egypt with you." So you and I have a better understanding of God's vastness than did these ancient men. But God appeared to him in specific places and went with him to specific places. Now that's going to be reinforced when they get back to Canaan and they have that tent, right? The tabernacle, and inside the tabernacle is a box, and God meets with his people at the place where that box is. So it's even going to get to the place where Israel and Israel's enemies think about God being in space and time. So again, I think we understand a little bit better about the nature of God than they did, but God did visit with them in particular places and times, and he said, I'm going to go with you down to Egypt. So everything's going to be all right. I'm not going to leave you alone. I know that I told you needed to stay in Canaan because I was going to be with you in Canaan, but now we're going to Egypt. So he's going to follow him down. Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. So Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt, taking with them their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan. Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons and his grandsons, his daughters and his granddaughters, all of his offspring. And we find out later that there's about 70 that make the trip. So all 70 of them load up, and they take a bunch of their stuff with them. Now Pharaoh told Joseph, tell them don't worry too much about their stuff. They can have whatever they want when they get here. Right? We're hosting them. We're going to take care of them. They don't need to bring everything. But the list of things that they brought seems pretty monumental. This is a huge traveling group that is coming with carts and with flocks and with herds and with kids and grandkids, etc. So the final years of Jacob and Joseph then are set up. Jacob is going to get to Egypt. He's going to be able to be with his son again. And I've picked out just 3 or 4 highlights from their time together prior to the end of Jacob's life and prior to the end of Joseph's life. The first one is in Genesis 46:28. Skip down to 28. Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and he wept for a long time, because that's what Joseph does. He's a very emotional young man. So he wept for a long time. And Israel said to Joseph, now I'm ready to die, because I have seen for myself that you are still alive. So Joseph is going to do the advance work before they go to visit with Pharaoh. They're in Egypt now. They're near the land of Goshen. And Joseph wants them to have the land of Goshen. It's some of the best land in all of Egypt. Pharaoh has told him, you can pick out where you want them to be. Let them be in Goshen if you want to. Goshen is outstanding land for shepherds in particular. Right? So it's exactly what they need, and Joseph is going to kind of seal the deal to make sure that that's where they end up. So he coaches his brothers. When we go before Pharaoh and Pharaoh says, what's your job? You make sure that he understands that you're shepherds. He needs to know that you are shepherds, because Egyptians hate shepherds. And he's not going to want you anywhere near him. He's going to want you to be in Goshen. So if I say, well, why don't we settle them in Goshen? Pharaoh will say, that's great with me. I don't want them up here near me. Put them in Goshen. So he gets 5 of his brothers. He takes them before Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, what do you do for a living? They said, well, we've been shepherds all of our lives. And Pharaoh says, well, good, let's put you in Goshen. Goshen will be a good place for you. So the 70 descendants of Israel end up in Goshen, not because necessarily it's the best and the prettiest place, although it really is. They end up there because Pharaoh wants to get them away from polite company, and Egyptians don't want to have anything to do with shepherds. It's segregation by occupation. We don't want those people to be living in our neighborhoods. We don't want their sheep in our neighborhoods. However, Pharaoh may be prejudiced against shepherds. He is not stupid. And he says, if you've got some people in that group that are really good taking care of flocks and herds, I've got some flocks and herds, and I need some people to take care of them, because I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go anywhere near them. So Pharaoh lives the high life. He's got a great, existence because of who he is, and he's living in the palace, but he owns everything. Right? Joseph has kind of purchased all of Egypt for the guy, and he's got flocks and herds, so he's got to have somebody to take care of them. Now Joseph's brothers and his nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews will be in charge of taking care of all that. So they get settled in the right place. This is going to be the home of the Israelites for some 400 years. Goshen is going to become kind of a small Israelite territory inside of the Egyptian empire. What's going to happen is a population explosion among Israel. We start out with 70, and estimates by the time of the Exodus are anywhere from 600,000 to 1.2 million. So there's a ton of Israelites, which becomes the problem when we get over into Exodus. But they are well blessed. It's a great place to live. Their flocks and herds expand. Their families expand. Everything is going to go well for Jacob and his offspring because Joseph was there to intervene and make sure that everything was right. Now, what if Joseph slept with Potiphar's wife? No land of Goshen. What happens if the butler and the baker never have their dreams and Joseph doesn't interpret them? No land of Goshen. What happens if God doesn't give Pharaoh his dreams and put Joseph in the right place at the right time? No land of Goshen, right? So God has put all of this in line so that at the right time Joseph can bring his family to the right place so they'll flourish. They are going to grow immensely over the next 400 years. But in the short term, we've got two problems that are going to come up. Number one, Jacob is going to die. Now, when Jacob dies, where does that leave the other 11 brothers? Well, at least 10 of them. We figure Benjamin's okay. But 10 of the 12 brothers are going to be in a world of hurt when Jacob dies. So let's talk a little bit about Jacob's death and his funeral. Look at chapter 47, beginning in verse 27. 47:27. The Israelites settled in Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there. They were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years. So that's pretty cool, right? Joseph was 17 or thereabouts when his brothers sold him into slavery. When he gets back with his dad, he gets another 17 years. That's pretty good symmetry. I like bookends. I like things that kind of, you can surround your information with two identical things. So we had 17 years at the beginning, 17 years at the end. And he dies when he was 147 years old. So we're not talking about Methuselah anymore. We're not talking about 969 years. But they're still living longer than you and I think about. This is about double what our average lifespan is in the U.S. now. So 147 years. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph. And he said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt. When I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." Where were Abraham and Sarah buried? The cave of Machpelah, right? So we don't want to leave Jacob in Egypt. He needs to be carried back. Joseph said, "I will do what you ask me." He said, "Swear it to me." Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Very famous Old Testament passage. He worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. He was almost gone, but he was still celebrating because God had given him back to Joseph and Joseph back to him, and now he was going to end his life on this planet, and Joseph was going to make sure that he got back to the cave of Machpelah. Everything's going to be just what it needs to be, right? By the way, the Jews call it the cave of Machpelah, and the Islamic people call it the cave of the patriarchs. Right now, it's in Hebron, and it's on the West Bank, so it's in kind of a difficult area, just geographically, politically. Islam is in charge of the compound currently. But at this point, his greatest desire is to be gathered to his people. There was an idea among them that if I could be buried where they're buried, that's important. Do we still have that? Absolutely, absolutely. My mother passed last June. Her marker is in Lewisburg, Tennessee. And one of my cousins, they had Decoration Day at Mother's Day just recently. And she went and put a little banner on Mother's grave that has a cardinal, red bird, and some other birds on it. Mother loved cardinals, loved birds. And so she went and put that on and sent us a picture of it to say, here's where your mom belongs. My mom isn't there. My mom is still in Dallas. We've never had a funeral for her yet. But that's how we think. There's a particular place where you're supposed to end up. And we buy plots. We buy plots at the cemetery so that when we're gone, those that are left can take us to our spot, to our plot, and put us where we're supposed to be. That, by the way, is becoming less and less popular. Are you aware? More and more people are being cremated. Fewer people are being interred in the ground. So we'll see how that works out over the next years. But anyway, Jacob, Israel, wanted to go back because that was the place where he felt that he belonged. When he died, Joseph had him embalmed. As far as I know, the only body in the cave of the patriarchs, in the cave of Machpelah, that is embalmed is Jacob. So if they were able to go into the burial chamber, if the bodies were still in the burial chamber, one of them might actually still have survived. There might still be a body in there. I do not know. I've not read the archaeology on it. It's one of those things, usually when you've got a religious place, they don't want you to go in and do archaeology because they don't want it to say something different than what they're claiming already. And there's that sadness that accompanies if they don't find something. If we go in looking for the patriarchs and the patriarchs aren't there, then somehow it belittles the worth of the place, at least in some minds. But anyway, much pomp, much circumstance. Lots of Egyptians traveled along with the family to take him back to the cave for burial. They stopped at a big threshing floor and had a 7-day funeral, a 7-day wake, I guess you could, to get ready to go for the burial. And at the end of all of it, then Jacob was laid to rest with Abraham and with Sarah, but not with Rachel. And that's the sad thing. Rachel was buried outside of Bethlehem. If you remember when Benjamin died, they buried her along the way. And so she was not part of the family plot there at Machpelah. All right, look at chapter 50. Chapter 50. This is the last chapter in Genesis. We're going to start in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs that we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph and said, "Your father left these instructions before he died." I'd want to read the will myself. "This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. He cried some more. This touched his heart. And I'm sometimes cold-hearted, and I watch too much NCIS. Do you believe them? Did Jacob actually say that? I don't know. But the brothers, they present they've got the materials. Hey, we want you to know that Daddy said you have to be nice to us after he's gone. And Joseph is okay with that. Joseph, he still loves his brothers. He still wants what's best for the family. So his brothers came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and for your children." And he reassured them, and he spoke kindly to them. So Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all of his father's family. He lived to be 110 years old. He saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. He had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. In fact, if you go back a couple of chapters, you can see where Jacob blesses Ephraim and Manasseh, but we skipped past that part. Also, the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. So Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." So when Jacob dies, Joseph has enough clout that he can take a parade of people and travel all the way to Canaan and bury his daddy whatever he wants to do. Pharaoh's going to be in on that. That's fine. But when Joseph dies, Pharaoh's not going to want Joseph taken somewhere else. He's a national hero. He's his second in command. He is Egyptian more than he is Canaanite as far as the Pharaoh is concerned. But he makes his brothers promise, "When I'm dead, when you leave here, you take me with you." So Joseph died at the age of 110. After they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt, where he remained for close to 400 years. But when they left Egypt, the Israelites took him with them. And they buried him again when they got to Israel. There is a small, I think it depends on the week, at sometimes it has been a Hebrew school for rabbis, and at times it has been a baby mosque. So again, it's in that territory around Hebron. And I saw pictures where it had been ransacked about 15 years ago, that some people broke in and tore down. It was in Jewish control at that point, and some militants broke in and tore it down. But we believe, at least, that that is the final resting place of the embalmed Joseph, that they did not leave in Egypt when they left 400 years later. So generation after generation passes this down, and they said, "Look, when we leave, you see that little mausoleum over there? The body in there goes with us. We don't leave Joseph behind." And so eventually they took Joseph when they left to go back to the land of Canaan. So that closes out the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. Lots of beginnings in the book of beginnings. The beginning of the world, the beginning of rain, the beginning of families, the beginning of the nation of Israel, all kinds of beginnings in the book of beginnings. Any questions about anything that we've looked at since July of last year? It only took us 10 months to do Genesis. We're doing pretty good. We're moving right along. No questions?
What's the timeline from when Joseph died to when Pharaoh died?
To when that Pharaoh died? It wouldn't have been that many years. When you begin Exodus, it begins that a Pharaoh arose that did not know Joseph. We're probably not talking about an individual ruler, but a dynasty. So we're talking 400 years. This dynasty, if I've got the right dynasty, dies out in about 200 years, and a new dynasty rises up. So the wealth that this guy gets and his family gets because of Joseph means nothing to whoever takes over when he's gone. So when we look at a new Pharaoh came in that didn't know Joseph, we're still talking about 400 years later. New dynasty. Any other question? That was a fabulous question. I enjoyed that question. All right. If there's nothing else, then we'll give you the opportunity to respond if you need to as we stand and sing.